The woman he never saw. Marcus Cole was 38 years old and owned half of Manhattan. He noticed everything. Every ledger, every decimal that didn't belong, every clause buried in a contract that could swing a deal $10 million in either direction. He'd built Cole Capital from a single studio apartment in the Bronx into a real estate empire that stretched from Midtown to the Brooklyn waterfront. His name was etched into the facades of 12 towers. His face had appeared on the cover of New York Business Monthly 3 times. At 32, he'd been called the most dangerous developer in the 5 boroughs. He took it as a compliment. He tracked everything, every number, every person, every inconsistency, except the woman who had raised him. Her name was Sarah Ann Williams. She'd been with his family since Marcus was 4 years old, hired by his mother to help manage the household on the Upper West Side back when the Cole family still lived in a brownstone on 84th Street before the money got serious. When his mother died of cancer, Marcus was just 9 years old, standing at the graveside in a suit 2 sizes too big. Sarah stayed. Nobody asked her to. She just didn't leave. She held him when the nightmares came. She sat outside his bedroom door on the nights his father drank too much and the shouting got loud. She packed his lunches, helped with his homework, kept the refrigerator stocked and the lights on when his father forgot to pay the bills. She loved him when no one else could figure out how. But Marcus never asked about her life, never wondered where she went at night or what she did on weekends, never thought about whether she was happy or lonely or hurting. She was simply there, quiet, reliable, invisible in the way that only the most faithful people become invisible. You stop seeing them precisely because they never leave. Until 3 weeks ago. That's when Marcus first noticed the bags. Sarah arrived every morning the same way. She always had purse over one shoulder, small canvas grocery tote in her hand. She'd let herself in with her key, start the coffee, and move through his penthouse with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this for decades. Because she had. But now, 2 or 3 nights a week, she was leaving differently, not with just her purse, with 2 heavy duffel bags that had not been there when she arrived that morning, bags that appeared from somewhere in the apartment or possibly from outside, and disappeared with her into the elevator. Tuesday, Friday, Monday, same routine, same bags, same quiet exit just after 6 in the evening. Marcus noticed on the 2nd week. By the 3rd week, his mind had already gone somewhere dark. She's taking something. He told himself he was being rational. He told himself that anyone in his position would investigate. He had a building full of valuable things, art, electronics, documents, a safe in his study he was fairly certain Sarah knew the combination to because she'd seen him use it 100 times. He ran a full inventory. His office, the kitchen pantry, the linen closet, the storage room, the safe. He had his building manager pull the security footage from the lobby cameras and review 2 weeks of Sarah's exits. Nothing was missing, the safe was untouched, the inventory was clean. But those bags kept appearing, and the question burned hotter with every passing day. What is she hiding? So on a cold Wednesday evening in November, when the sky over Manhattan had gone the color of wet concrete and a thin rain was starting to fall, Marcus Cole decided to follow her. He left his office at 5, his assistant nearly fainted. She'd never seen him leave before 8 and drove uptown, parked half a block from his building on 72nd Street and sat in the dark with the engine off. He'd worn a dark coat, nothing with his name on it. He felt ridiculous. He also couldn't stop. Sarah walked out at 6:17, coat buttoned to her throat, bags hanging heavy from both shoulders, head slightly bowed against the wind. Marcus waited until she'd reached the corner, then got out and followed on foot. She walked to the 72nd Street station and took the C train downtown. Marcus 2 cars behind her. She switched to the A at Fulton Street and rode it into Brooklyn, getting off at the Nostrand Avenue stop. Marcus followed her up the stairs and into a neighborhood he recognized from development reports, blocks of row houses and bodegas and beauty supply shops, the kind of neighborhood his company described in prospectuses as transitional and high potential. Words that meant, "We are coming for this." Sarah turned down a side street, then a narrower one, stopping in front of a worn brick building wedged between a shuttered nail salon and a vacant storefront with plywood over the windows. A hand-lettered sign above the door read, "Cornerstone Community Kitchen, everyone welcome." The paint on the sign was peeling at the corners. The steps leading down to the entrance were cracked, but through the narrow windows near the sidewalk, Marcus could see warm yellow light. Sarah knocked twice, the door opened, light spilled out. Marcus waited 60 seconds, then he followed her in. The room hit him like a wall. Folding tables arranged in long rows, mismatched chairs, paper plates and plastic spoons, the smell of onions and broth and something baking, and people, more people than Marcus had expected. Elderly men in thin coats who held their soup bowls with both hands like they were precious, young mothers with hollow eyes and children on their laps, a row of teenage boys eating fast and quietly, not making eye contact with anyone. A man in the corner talking to himself softly, rocking slightly, wrapped in a blanket someone had given him. And there was Sarah, hair down, loose around her shoulders, wearing an old blue sweater Marcus had never seen before. She was standing behind a folding table that served as a serving station, ladling soup from a large pot into paper bowls, handing out rolls wrapped in foil, her face open and alive in a way Marcus had never once seen in the 34 years she'd spent in his household. She was smiling, not her work smile, the polite, efficient expression she wore in his penthouse, something deeper, something that reached her eyes and changed the whole shape of her face. She looked like a completely different woman. "Mr. Henson, I made the potato soup tonight, the one with the rosemary, extra portion for you." She handed an elderly man a bowl and a roll. He took it with both hands and mumbled something grateful. "Deshawn, baby, sit down before you fall over. You look like you haven't slept in a week." A teenager grinned sheepishly and found a seat. "Ms. Patris, I brought the cream for your hands. It's in the bag by the door, pick it up before you leave." She knew every name, every face. She moved behind that table like she was exactly where she was supposed to be in the world. A young man with a short fade and an army surplus jacket stepped up to the table. He looked to be in his mid-20s, lean with careful eyes. "Miss Sarah," he grinned, "please tell me you made the cornbread." "Made it fresh this afternoon, Darius." She handed him 2 pieces wrapped in foil. "Don't eat both of them before you even sit down, I know how you are." He laughed a real laugh and carried his tray to a table. A small girl, maybe 6 years old, tugged at the hem of Sarah's sweater, big eyes, braids coming loose on one side. "Miss Sarah, where does all the food come from?" Sarah set down her ladle, crouched to eye level with the girl and tucked a loose braid back behind her ear. "From love, baby. I make it with love so that you can grow up strong and tall and do something beautiful with your life." The little girl smiled, so wide it looked like it might hurt. Marcus pressed his back flat against the wall near the entrance. His chest felt like something was sitting on it. Those bags were not full of stolen goods. They were full of groceries, food that Sarah had bought with her own money, her own salary, which Marcus paid, which was fair but not generous, and cooked, likely during her breaks, in his kitchen. Food that she had carried on 2 trains and walked 4 blocks in the rain to serve to people who had nothing. People his company had, in several cases, directly helped make homeless. He stood there for almost 2 hours. He didn't move, he just watched. He watched Sarah learn about a man named Mr. Henson, whose heating had been cut off for 3 weeks. He watched her slip a folded 20 into the blanket of the man in the corner before anyone could see. He watched her pull a first aid kit from one of those duffel bags and quietly clean a cut on a young woman's forearm while the woman stared at the wall. He watched her sit with a mother and 3 kids for 20 minutes after the meal was over, helping the oldest child with what looked like math homework. While the mother ate in silence and looked, just for a moment, like the weight on her had lifted slightly. Sarah wasn't just feeding people. She was holding them. When Sarah finally walked out just after 8, 30 bags empty now, steps slower, shoulders down with exhaustion, Marcus was already at the curb in his car. He rolled down the window. "Sarah." She stopped, turned, looked at him. No shock, no guilt, no scrambling for an explanation. Just a long, quiet look, like a person who has been carrying a secret for so long that being found out barely registers as a surprise. "Get in," he said. She did. They drove through Brooklyn in silence. The rain had picked back up. The streetlights made long orange smears on the wet pavement. Marcus kept both hands on the wheel and stared straight ahead because he didn't trust himself to speak yet. Finally, his voice came out rough, like he'd been holding it clenched in his chest for hours. "How long?" Sarah looked out the passenger window. 17 years since my son passed." The words landed like something physical, Marcus felt them in his sternum. He had sent flowers to Dominic's funeral. He remembered his assistant handing him the card to sign. He'd signed it without reading it, handed it back, and gone into a meeting. He had never asked Sarah how her son died, never asked what she needed in the weeks and months that followed, never followed up even once. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he asked. Sarah turned and looked at him directly. When she spoke, her voice was soft, but there was something underneath it, not anger exactly, sharper than that. "What would you have done with it, Marcus? Turned it into a charity event, put your name on a building and called it community development?" She paused. "I needed those people to stay human, not a line item in your foundation's annual report." He didn't answer, because she wasn't wrong. "You would have written a check," Sarah said quietly, "and a check would have changed nothing except how you felt about yourself." They drove the rest of the way in silence. He pulled up in front of her house in Flatbush, a narrow two-story on a block of similar houses, well kept, a pot of something on the front porch that had died back for winter. Marcus had never been here before, had never thought to ask where she lived. Sarah was reaching for the door handle when something in the front window stopped Marcus cold. Through the glass he could see a shadow box mounted on the wall, military colours, a medal on dark velvet, a framed citation beneath it. "What is that?" he asked quietly. Sarah paused, she looked at the window, then she opened the car door and said, "Come in." He followed her inside. The house was small and clean and full of the smell of old wood and something floral. Photographs covered one wall of the hallway, a young Sarah in army fatigues, grinning at the camera, a teenage boy in a graduation gown, the same boy at what looked like a birthday party, maybe 20 years old, laughing with his head thrown back. "Dominic." Marcus stopped in front of the shadow box, looked at it for a long time. A Purple Heart medal, next to it a framed certificate with official government letterhead. Specialist Sarah Ann Williams, United States Army, 3rd Infantry Division, awarded the Purple Heart for wounds received in action during Operation Iraqi Freedom, additionally cited for valor in saving the lives of 11 fellow soldiers while under direct enemy fire. Her courage under extreme duress reflects the highest traditions of military service. 11 lives. The woman who ironed his shirts every Tuesday morning and left his coffee at exactly the right temperature, and had spent 34 years keeping his life running smoothly. This woman had saved 11 lives in a war zone and come home to a country that had completely forgotten her. And so had he. Marcus stood in front of that shadow box for a long time. He didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. "Before anything else, I need your help. Without your subscription, the algorithm might hide us from each other forever. Subscribe now to ensure we meet again. And now, let the story unfold." Marcus didn't go home that night. He drove back to Manhattan, parked in the garage under his building, and sat in his car until almost 4 a.m. The city hummed around him. Somewhere above him, 61 floors up, his penthouse was perfectly quiet and perfectly empty. He kept seeing that medal on Sarah's wall. 11 lives. She had run toward gunfire to save 11 people. She had come home, buried a son, and spent 17 years feeding strangers out of her own paycheck. She had gotten up every morning for 34 years, come to his apartment, taken care of him, and never once asked him for anything she hadn't already earned. And he had never asked her a single question about who she was. He thought about being 9 years old at his mother's funeral. His father so destroyed by grief that he couldn't even look at Marcus without flinching. The whole terrible afternoon of dark suits and whispered condolences. And Sarah, standing beside him the entire time, not speaking, just there, her hand steady in his when everything else was trembling. He thought about being 14, sick with the flu, his father away somewhere on business, Sarah sitting at the edge of his bed with a bowl of soup and a wet cloth for his forehead, staying until he fell asleep. He thought about being 17, the night before he left for Columbia, coming downstairs to find his bags already packed and his shirts freshly pressed. Sarah standing at the bottom of the stairs with her arms open. The hug she gave him, the longest, tightest hug he'd received in years. And the words she whispered before she let go. "Make me proud." He'd built an empire. He'd made hundreds of millions of dollars. He'd put the Cole name on towers that changed skylines. But he'd never once asked if she was proud, never asked what she needed, never asked if she was doing okay, Never asked anything at all because she was simply part of the machinery of his life, and the machinery worked, and he'd never questioned why. When he finally went upstairs, the sun was coming up over the East River. The city was turning gold and pale, and Marcus stood at his floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the skyline, his skyline, full of buildings he'd made and deals he'd closed, and felt like the loneliest man in New York. Sarah arrived at 8 the next morning. Marcus was in the kitchen, still in yesterday's clothes. He hadn't slept. "Good morning, Mr. Cole." She set her bag down and reached for the coffee maker. "Sarah," something in his voice made her pause. "Sit down, please." She looked at him carefully, the same way she used to look at him when he was a teenager, and she could tell something was wrong before he'd said a word. Then she pulled out a stool at the kitchen island and sat. Marcus poured the coffee himself, set a cup in front of her. "Tell me about Dominic," he said. The silence that followed lasted a long time. Sarah wrapped both hands around the mug. "He was 26, she said finally. Her voice was very steady. He'd had type 1 diabetes since he was 12, managed it okay when he was young when he was on my insurance, but after he turned 26 he was on his own." She paused. "He had a part-time job, no benefits. The insulin he needed was $400 a month. He made $14 an hour." She set the mug down. "He started rationing it, stretching doses. You do what you have to do when you can't afford what you need." She looked at the counter. His neighbor found him in his apartment. He'd been in a coma for 2 days. Marcus closed his eyes. "He died because of a prescription," Sarah said. $387. "That's what my son's life cost. That's the number." Her voice didn't break. It had the quality of something that had already broken a long time ago and been reassembled into something harder. "So yes, that's why I feed people who can't afford groceries, because I know what happens when the math doesn't work out. I've seen it up close." Marcus cancelled every meeting that day. He sat in his study with his laptop open and spent the afternoon reading things he had never read before. Not acquisition reports, not market projections, community impact assessments, displacement studies, the actual human data behind his company's last decade of development. He found a file on a man named Raymond Okafor, age 69, resided at 1140 Atlantic Avenue, Brooklyn for 31 years, longtime community figure, retired transit worker, regular volunteer at 2 local churches, displaced following coal capital acquisition and renovation, 2022, buyout offered, $18,500, current status, transitional shelter, Bedford-Stuyvesant. Marcus read it twice, then he kept going. Keisha Monroe, age 34, single mother, 3 children aged 4, 7 and 11. Worked as a nursing assistant at Kings County Hospital and cleaned offices evenings. Displaced from her apartment of 9 years. New affordable options in the area required income verification she couldn't meet. She now commutes 3.5 hours daily by bus to maintain her jobs. Her children attend their 3rd school in 18 months. Gerald and Frances Tompkins, ages 71 and 68, married 44 years, displaced from the home they'd shared since 1986. Frances has early-stage dementia and had lived her entire adult life within 4 blocks of their apartment. Gerald reports that her condition has worsened significantly since the move. He believes the disorientation of losing familiar surroundings accelerated her decline. Marcus put the laptop on the coffee table, put his elbows on his knees and held his face in his hands. He had signed every one of these deals. He had sat in boardrooms and looked at spreadsheets and approved acquisition timelines and relocation budgets. He had done it efficiently and professionally, and he had told himself it was the cost of progress, the necessary friction of a city constantly reinventing itself. He had never once put a name to any of it. Thursday night, Marcus showed up at the Cornerstone kitchen at 6:45. The rain had stopped but the cold had sharpened. He parked down the block and sat for a moment watching people arrive, men in thin jackets, women pulling children by the hand, a few teenagers moving in a loose group, all of them heading toward that basement door like it was the warmest place left in the world. Maybe, for some of them, it was. He went in. Sarah was already at the stove, her back to the door. She heard him come in, turned and looked at him with that watchful expression again, not hostile, just careful. "I want to help," Marcus said, "if that's okay." A long pause. She studied his face like she was reading something in it. Then she held out a ladle. Soup needs stirring, both pots, don't let the bottom catch. He took the ladle and went to the stove. People started coming. Marcus stayed in the kitchen at first, stirring, ladling, keeping his head down. Darius came through and did a double take when he saw Marcus behind the serving table. "You came back," he said. "I came back." Darius looked at him for a moment, then nodded and moved on. An older man came through the line slowly, leaning on a cane. Marcus filled his bowl without thinking about it. "Thank you, young man," the man said. "You're welcome, sir." Marcus looked at him. He had the build of someone who had once been very strong and the eyes of someone who had seen a great deal. "I'm Marcus." "Raymond," the man said. Marcus went still. Raymond Okafor, 31 years on Atlantic Avenue, displaced by coal capital, current status, transitional shelter. "Enjoy your meal," Marcus said quietly. His hands weren't entirely steady. Raymond moved to a table in the corner and sat down slowly, like his joints hurt. Halfway through the evening, Marcus glanced at Sarah and felt his stomach drop. She was gripping the edge of the serving table. Her face had gone slightly pale, beads of sweat at her hairline. She caught herself, straightened up, kept moving, but for a moment she'd looked like she might fall. "Sarah," he moved to her side, keeping his voice low. "When did you last eat?" "I'm fine, Marcus." "That's not what I asked." She didn't answer. Marcus filled a bowl, set it on the small counter in the kitchen, and looked at her until she sat down. She ate slowly, and he went back to serving, and when he looked over at her a few minutes later, she had more color in her face. When everyone had gone and the tables were stacked and the floor was swept, Marcus sat down across from Darius, who was finishing the last of the cleaning. "How long have you known Sarah?" Marcus asked. Darius wrung out the mop. "About 3 years. I came back from my second deployment and I couldn't hold it together. PTSD, couldn't keep a job, lost my apartment." He leaned the mop against the wall. "I was sleeping under the BQE when Miss Sarah found me, literally under the highway. She sat down on the ground next to me and asked if I was hungry." Marcus waited. "She brought me soup, sat with me for 2 hours, didn't push, didn't preach, didn't call anyone, just talked." Darius crossed his arms. "Eventually she helped me find a program, got me connected to veteran services, checked on me every single week, still does." He looked at Marcus. "She saved my life, not because it was her job, just because she's that kind of person." "Did you know she was a veteran?" Darius blinked. "What?" "Purple Heart, Iraqi freedom. She saved 11 soldiers under fire." Darius stared at him. "She never told me that." "She never tells anyone." A long silence. "Why are you really here?" Darius asked. "Like really?" Marcus looked around the basement. The stacked chairs, the small kitchen, the handwritten sign on the wall that said "All are welcome" in blue marker, the letters slightly uneven like a child had helped. "Because I've known her my whole life," he said. "She raised me, and I just found out I don't know the first thing about who she is." Darius was quiet for a moment. "You're the one she works for, aren't you?" he said. It wasn't quite a question. Marcus nodded. "And you never asked?" "No." Darius shook his head slowly. "Man," he let out a breath. "She gives everything she has to people like me, and the people she actually spends her days with, the ones who could really help her, they don't even see her." He paused. "I'm not trying to be harsh, I'm just saying what it is." "You're right," Marcus said. "I know I'm right." Darius stood up. "Look, she comes every Thursday, 7 o'clock every week, no exceptions, rain or snow or whatever. If you're serious about this, don't make it a one-time thing. Show up, keep showing up, listen more than you talk." He pulled on his jacket. "And stop trying to fix everything. That's not what people here need, they need to be seen." He paused at the door. "Miss Sarah's good at that, watch how she does it." He left. Marcus sat alone in the empty basement for a long time. On the drive home that night, Sarah was quieter than usual. "When did you last see a doctor?" Marcus asked. He could feel her stiffen slightly. "Sarah, I see a doctor when I need to." "When was the last time?" A long pause. 3 years ago," she said finally. "Maybe 4. "Why that long?" She looked out the window. The Brooklyn street slid past in the dark. "Your insurance plan covers the basics, Marcus. Emergency room if I'm actively dying. Basic checkups, technically, but the copay is $80 and the nearest in-network provider is 40 minutes by transit. She paused. After I pay my rent and buy what I need for the kitchen, there isn't a lot left over. I made a decision a long time ago about where my money would go. It didn't go to me. The words sat in the car between them like a physical object. Marcus had chosen her insurance plan the way he'd chosen everything else in her employment, efficiently, with minimal thought. He spent more on a single dinner than Sarah made in a week. He had never once asked if her salary actually covered her life. I'm upgrading your insurance, he said. Full coverage, no copays, effective immediately. Silence. And I'm making you a doctor's appointment. Maury, silence. Marcus, her voice was soft but there was something edged in it. Why now? I've worked for you for 34 years. Why does this matter now? The question cut cleanly through him. Because I wasn't paying attention, he said, and I'm trying to change that. She looked at him for a long moment. He couldn't read her expression in the dark. I'll go to the appointment, she said at last. Not because you arranged it, because I have people counting on me and I can't do this work if I fall apart. A pause. But if you really want to change, and I mean really, not just the guilt talking, then stop looking only at me. Start looking at what you've been building, who it's been built on top of. It's not just me you've been blind to, Marcus, it's everyone. He called his HR director at 7 the next morning. Full coverage, no limits, retroactive to January. Done. Then he opened the displacement files again. He read until midnight, name after name, story after story. He'd been through perhaps 200 of them when he found the one about Gerald and Frances Tompkins, the couple married 44 years, Frances with dementia, displaced from the home she'd lived in since 1986. Gerald's note at the bottom of the complaint form, submitted to the city housing office and apparently never responded to. She asks where we are every morning, I tell her we moved. She cries, I tell her again the next day, she always cries. This is my life now, we were fine before. Marcus sat with that for a very long time. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning. Marcus was in a board meeting when his cell buzzed, a 212 number he didn't recognize. He let it go. It buzzed again 30 seconds later, then again. He stepped out. Mr. Cole, this is Dr. Reeves at New York Presbyterian, Brooklyn. You're listed as the emergency contact for Sarah Williams. The board meeting was over as far as Marcus was concerned. He found her on the 4th floor in a private room, an IV in her arm, monitors beeping softly. She was asleep. Her face looked smaller than usual. Maury tired, Maury real. Marcus sat in the chair beside her bed and noticed that his hands were shaking and couldn't make them stop. Dr. Reeves came in 20 minutes later. She was young, maybe 35, with the measured voice of someone who delivered difficult news regularly and hadn't yet become numb to it. Ms. Williams has type 2 diabetes, she said, advanced and unmanaged. Her kidneys are showing early damage consistent with years of uncontrolled blood sugar. Her blood pressure is critically elevated. She's severely anemic. She paused to let each item land. All of these conditions are treatable and manageable, but they've been ignored for years. Her previous insurance coverage would not have covered the medications and specialist visits she needed. She'd have been looking at $400 to $500 a month out of pocket, possibly more. Marcus stared at the floor. She was choosing between her health and feeding other people. Dr. Reeves was quiet for a moment. That's the impression I got, yes, she's a remarkable woman. She stood. She'll need to be here for a few days while we stabilize her. After that, she'll need ongoing management medication, regular monitoring, dietary changes, reduced stress. She looked at Marcus directly. She cannot continue living the way she has been, Mr. Cole. Her body is telling her that very clearly. When Sarah woke, Marcus was still there. The room had gone quiet except for the monitors. Outside, the city was doing what it always did. You're still here, she said softly. I'm still here. She looked at the IV. Some expression he couldn't fully name crossed her face. Sarah, his voice came out low and careful like he was trying not to break something. Your middle name is Anne. You were born in 1957 in Savannah, Georgia. You enlisted at 20 years old, served 2 tours, came home to a country that gave you very little in return. You had a son named Dominic. He died at 26 years old because he couldn't afford a prescription that cost less than a week of my gym membership. He stopped, breathed. And for 17 years since then, you have spent your own salary feeding people this city forgot about. because you understand in your bones what it means to be forgotten, because you've lived it, because Dominic lived it. Tears moved quietly down Sarah's face. She didn't wipe them. I have given you the minimum legal coverage I could get away with, Marcus said. I paid you fairly and told myself that was enough without ever asking if it was enough for your actual life. I never asked if you could afford your medication or your rent or anything else. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and didn't try to keep the crack out of his voice. You raised me, Sarah. You were the one constant in my entire childhood. When my mother died and my father fell apart, you were the only thing that held that house together. You held me together, and I paid you back by making you invisible. The room was very quiet. I don't want your guilt, Sarah said after a while. Her voice was soft but steady. I mean that. Guilt helps no one. I've watched people drown in guilt for years, and all it does is make them feel like they've done something by feeling bad. I know it's not guilt. Marcus looked at her. I want to change, actually change, and I need your help to do it. He sat up straighter. I want you to come work with me, not as my housekeeper, as my community relations director. Real salary 3 times what you're making now. Full benefits, full coverage, a seat at every table, every meeting, every decision. He paused. You've been doing the work I should have been funding for 17 years. I want to make it official. I want to build the way you feed people with attention, with names, with dignity. Sarah was quiet for a long time. Outside, a cart rattled down the hallway. Someone laughed at the nurse's station. You know this is going to be hard, she said finally. I know. People won't trust you, not at first. You've taken too much from too many for too long. I know. And you can't just throw money at it and call it done. That's what you've always done. Write a check, put your name on it, move on. I know that too. He looked at her steadily. That's exactly why I need you, because you know how to do this the right way and I don't. She looked at him, those clear eyes that had watched him grow from a 4-year-old boy into whatever he'd become, that had never stopped seeing him even when he stopped seeing her. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, the faintest smile. Don't thank me yet, this is going to take everything you have. Sarah spent 5 days in the hospital. Marcus visited every morning and every evening. He brought her books. He sat with her in silence. He learned things he should have known for decades. Her favorite color was deep purple. She had loved gospel music her entire life, specifically the old recordings, Al Green and Mahalia Jackson, the ones that sounded like they were being sung in a room with wooden floors. She had always wanted to see the ocean at sunrise, not from a city beach, from somewhere quiet, somewhere she could hear it properly. She'd never had the money or the time. Small things, human things, the architecture of a person he had lived beside for 34 years and never bothered to know. 3 months after Sarah left the hospital, Marcus stood in front of the New York City Planning Commission. Same room where he'd presented the Atlantic Yards expansion 18 months earlier. Same high ceilings, same long table, same commissioners who had applauded a $400 million deal that had displaced, among others, Raymond Okafor. I'm withdrawing the original Atlantic Yards proposal, Marcus said, and replacing it with a revised plan. We're calling it Atlantic Commons. He moved to his first slide. Instead of renderings and ROI projections, there were photographs, faces, names, stories. This is Raymond Okafor. He's 70 years old. He lived on Atlantic Avenue for 31 years. Our company purchased his building in 2022, renovated it, and priced him and his neighbors out of their homes. We offered him $18,500 for 31 years. That money was gone in 5 months. He paused. Raymond is now our lead community advisor on this project. He's been helping us redesign it from the ground up for the past 3 months. He knows this neighborhood better than any consultant we've ever hired. Raymond sat in the front row in a dark blazer. He nodded once. This is Keisha Monroe. She was displaced from her apartment of 9 years by Cole Capital's Nostrand Avenue project. She's now our tenant advocacy coordinator, making sure that no family is moved out of their home without real options, real notice, and real support. Keisha sat beside Raymond. Her eyes were bright. Atlantic Commons will be 40% affordable housing units, 30% workforce housing, 30% market rate. Every family displaced by our previous development in this area has been personally contacted and offered first right of return, not as tenants this time, as partial owners. equity stakes in the buildings they helped make valuable by living there for decades. The commissioners leaned forward. We are hiring exclusively from the local community for construction. We're running paid apprenticeship programs in partnership with the building trades unions. We're putting a full-service community centre in the ground floor of the main building, operated by residents, programmed by residents, with childcare, job training, health clinics, and a commercial kitchen. He stopped. This project will take longer to build than our original timeline. Our profit margins will be smaller. Some of our investors have already walked, but we will build something that actually serves the people of this community, and it will last because they will own a piece of it. One commissioner raised her hand. Mr. Cole, this is a significant departure from your previous development model. What changed? Marcus looked back into the room. Sarah was sitting in the second to last row, a yellow legal pad in her lap. I did, he said. The vote was unanimous, approved. In the months that followed, something shifted in the way Marcus moved through the world. Every Thursday night he was at the Cornerstone kitchen, 7 o'clock, no exceptions. He learned names, he learned stories. He started to understand what Sarah had understood for 17 years, that presence was not something you could purchase or delegate. You had to show up, you had to keep showing up, you had to be willing to be uncomfortable. Darius was hired as Director of Veteran Services for the Atlantic Commons project, running programs that connected returning soldiers with housing, employment, and mental health support. He was good at it in the particular way that people are good at things they've survived personally. Raymond Okafor joined as neighborhood historian and community liaison. He walked the construction site with Marcus every week, pointing out where things had been, what had mattered, what needed to be honored in the design. Marcus hired Keisha Monroe full-time. She redesigned the company's entire tenant relations process from scratch, and the resulting protocol, which every Cole Capital property manager was now required to follow, bore almost no resemblance to what they'd been doing before. Sarah was everywhere, connecting people who needed to meet each other, translating between the community and the boardroom, calling Marcus out quietly and directly when he slipped back into old habits, when he talked too much and listened too little, when he reached for the checkbook instead of the phone, when he confused efficiency with care. You almost did it again today, she told him one evening at the kitchen, after he'd cut off Raymond mid-sentence during a planning meeting. You started finishing his sentences. I know, I caught myself. You caught yourself 30 seconds after you should have. She raised an eyebrow. Getting better, not there yet. 18 months after the Planning Commission vote, Atlantic Commons opened. Not with a ribbon-cutting ceremony, with a block party. Tables stretched the length of the street. A DJ set up on a corner, playing something with a deep bass line that you could feel in your chest. Kids ran between the new buildings, which had wide windows and front stoops and community gardens that residents had designed themselves. The smell of food from half a dozen different family kitchens drifted through the November air. Marcus stood at the edge of it, watching. Raymond was on his stoop, the same east-facing view he'd had on Atlantic Avenue for 31 years, recreated in the new building's design specifically because Raymond had mentioned it once and Marcus had written it down. He lifted a hand when he saw Marcus. Marcus lifted his back. Keisha's kids were playing basketball on the new court she'd helped design. She stood at the edge of the court watching them, arms folded, with the expression of someone who has been through the worst and come out carrying something worth carrying. Darius walked over with a woman Marcus had met a few months back. Mr. Cole, you remember Amara? Of course, how are you? She has something she wants to say. Darius smiled. Amara stepped forward. Darius told me what you did, gave him a real chance when no one else would. She paused. Thank you. He gave me a chance first, Marcus said. He told me the truth about myself when I needed to hear it. That's harder than any job I could have offered him. Darius laughed and walked back toward the food tables. Sarah came to stand beside Marcus as the sun began to drop toward the water. How does it feel? She asked. Marcus thought about it honestly. Different than I thought it would. I thought it would feel like winning something. It doesn't feel like that. What does it feel like? He watched a little girl, Zoe, from the kitchen, taller now, running with 2 older kids cut across the new grass in the common courtyard. Like something that was broken for a long time just got set right, he said. Not fixed, just set right. Like it's going to take a long time to fully heal, but at least it's pointing the correct direction now. Sarah was quiet. The sky was going gold and pink over the rooftops. You know what I think about sometimes, Marcus said. What? That night I followed you, I was so certain I was going to catch a thief. He shook his head slowly. I was ready to confront you, I had the whole speech prepared, and instead I found all of that, all of those people, all of that love you'd been moving through the world with every week for 17 years completely invisible to me. His voice had gone quiet. I thought you were taking something from me. But the truth was you'd been giving everything you had, your whole life, and I'd never once looked up long enough to see it. Sarah was still for a moment. I forgave you a long time ago, she said, not because what happened was okay, because carrying unforgiveness would have cost me too much. I had too many people to feed. I don't deserve it. Probably not, a small smile, but forgiveness isn't about deserving, it's about what you do with the space it creates. She looked at him. You're doing something with it, Marcus, that matters. A voice cut across the courtyard. Miss Sarah, come see the garden, we planted the seeds today and you can already see them if you look really close. Zoe, waving both arms. Sarah laughed, that full, real laugh that Marcus had finally started to know. I'll be right there, baby. She started toward Zoe, then stopped, turned back one more time. Marcus. Yes. Welcome home. She walked away, and Marcus stood in the middle of everything that had been built and broken and rebuilt. The laughter and the music, and the children running and the families sitting on stoops they actually owned, and felt those two words settle somewhere deep. He had spent 38 years building monuments to himself, towers you could see from helicopters, his name in steel 40 stories up, empire. And he had missed the whole thing. The thing that mattered was this, right here, names you took the time to learn, presents you showed up to give, dignity you refused to negotiate away, a community that knew you'd stay. He walked into the crowd, shook hands, listened to stories, learned more names. And somewhere in the middle of it all, in a neighborhood he had almost destroyed, surrounded by people he had for too long refused to see, Marcus Cole finally understood what he'd been building toward his entire life. Not higher towers, deeper roots, not more, better, not a name on a building, a place where people knew your name back. He looked up at the Brooklyn sky, the same sky that arched over his penthouse across the river, 61 floors up, where everything was efficient and expensive and deeply, quietly empty, and said something he had never said before. Thank you for Sarah, for second chances, for the grace of finally seeing. The music played, the children danced, the sun went down over the rooftops, and for the first time in 38 years, Marcus Cole was exactly where he belonged. Not above it all. Inside it. Finally home.